All right, guys, so we're picking up where we left off last week. So if you remember, we had the King and Parliament pass the Stamp Act, which was a direct tax on all printed goods, any legal documents, paper, newspapers, playing cards, college degrees, all of that would have an additional, kind of like how we see sales tax, where we have an extra. If you're getting a soda for $1, you're going to pay $1.07 because you got that sales tax. So the stamp tax was kind of like that. So whatever the cost of the good was, it would also have to bear this stamp, which would have this additional tax that would be charged. So colonists, they start boycotting, they start intimidating tax collectors, and they do it. They get what they want in their eyes, and the king repeals the Stamp Act. But if you remember, that same day, he also passes something that they call the Declaratory Act, which basically says that, yeah, we're going to go ahead and repeal this one, but if we feel like we need to tax you, or we feel like we need to enforce certain laws, we have the right to do that. So that is kind of out there, but the colonists are just so jacked that they, got the Stamp Act repealed that they're not really paying attention to that. So here we see almost, around the same time as the Declaratory Act is passed, Parliament comes up with this new set of laws and taxes that they're going to place on the colonists called the Townshend Acts. So this is what we're going to look at today. So we say, what's next? The Townshend Act. So it's 1767. And like I said, shortly after, they repeal the Stamp Act, push the Declaratory Acts through, but Britain still has this issue that they need to raise money from the colonists. And again, they can't just keep taxing their English citizens that live in England. They've got to, find a way to get the colonists to pay their fair share. So Charles Townshend, who's in charge of the finances in Parliament at the time, comes up with this great idea on how they can raise some money to help kind of alleviate some of this debt that Britain is still having to deal with. And Townshend takes Benjamin Franklin's arguments into consideration when he is developing this new tax. So Franklin had two main points here. He said, the colonists are never going to accept a direct tax like the stamp tax. We understand like the mercantile taxes that you put in, like, the Sugar Act, and then some of those currency acts, but we'll never be okay with, just directly taxing, you directly taxing us. And that, if we continue still tread lightly, even by passing those laws, that do just deal with trade, because the colonists are prepared and, are already doing this boycotting of British goods. So you do need to kind of caution yourself, because they're kind of focusing on being able to produce the goods in America themselves, so they don't have to pay the taxes that they don't think are unfair, or that they think are fair. So he takes these two arguments and he comes up with this plan. We call these the Townshend Acts. And pretty much what the Townshend Act does, it's going to be a tax on imports. So it's not a direct tax that the colonists are going to have to pay. And this was what, Franklin kind of said that they were okay with. So now these taxes will be placed on these particular items that I'm listing here. And the specific reason these ones are chosen is because these are difficult items for the colonists to make themselves. So remember with cloth, they take that tax off of cloth because, they can make clothes themselves in the colonies, and they've already shown that with the Daughters of Liberty. But here now, these are going to be very difficult products to make with the resources that the colonies currently have. So they're going to raise this tax on these, paint, paper, tea, lead, glass, fine china, because they don't think that the colonists are going to be able to boycott these goods, therefore forcing them to actually pay these taxes, right? So he feels like he's, addressing the fact that they can't boycott these goods, but also at the same time, hey, it's not a direct tax, and that's kind of what you said you were mad about. So this is Charles Townshend's kind of idea behind taxing these particular goods. But something that's also included in this act, in this law, is, if you guys remember, we've had the Quartering Act in play now for quite a few years, but it wasn't really affecting the cities as much. But as we start to see Boston get a little more rowdy and, kind of disrespectful towards the king, at least in his eyes, they start to relocate some of these soldiers that were out west closer to the coastal areas. That's also cheaper for Britain to take care and get supplies to British soldiers if they're closer to the coast. So tons of these troops are going to be located, especially near ports like Boston. And the colonists are just straight up refusing to quarter these troops in their homes. They're saying, this isn't right. It's not our responsibility to take care of these troops. So they are just flat out refusing. So Britain is going to actually threaten to shut down the Massachusetts Assembly, which is basically their whole government, if they don't actually enforce the Quartering Act and make the colonists actually, house these soldiers. But the rest of the colonies kind of step up and say, wait, Britain, you're going to do what? You're going to shut down their government? And they are showing their concerns as well. So the king kind of has to come down on that and realize okay, we don't want to make all these colonies so mad and them rebel against us or something. So they compromise on the Quartering Act and they say, okay, you don't have to house them in your homes anymore, as long as you are giving them an area to live and providing resources for them. So you can set up barracks, you can use abandoned buildings if you want, or you can even house them in barns. So they kind of lower the standard of what quartering actually means, but they are going to force the colonists to provide these things for them, which isn't going to go too well. Also included, remember that Ritz of Assistance where pretty much the government can come in and search your home if they feel, or your warehouses, if they feel that you have smuggled goods. There were people like James Otis and others in the colonies that were challenging the legality of that, saying, no, this is pretty standard. You need a warrant if you want to come into the house. But the Townshend Act basically throw out all those cases and say, nope, this is completely legal. We are in our right to search if we feel smuggling is going on. So no, we do not need a warrant in order to conduct these searches. So they're kind of just doubling down on some of these pretty unpopular policies that have been in place. And again, like we've seen with everything, there's always two sides of the story. You're going to be looking at two sides of the story later today. But the British are thinking this is a fair tax. It's not direct because they had an issue with the idea of this direct tax like the Stamp Act was. So this is not that. It's going to be on imports, which they said was kind of okay. It raises money for the empire, even though we're going to later find out that the money that's being raised through the Townshend Act is actually going to go to pay the royal governors, which the colonists aren't too happy about because that's not really protection. That's, they are currently getting to kind of set the price for the governor. So they're not a big fan of that. And then the British citizens are just satisfied that the colonists are paying taxes. So in Britain's head, this checks all the boxes. It makes both sides happy. So we're good. We're going to move on. But we already know the colonists are not going to be okay with this. There's going to be a call for even more boycotts of British goods. People are just simply going to go without some of these goods that can only be produced in England and bought by the colonists. We're going to see that immediately British merchants see a 40% drop in the drop that they had already seen from the Stamp Act. So this is going to have another big impact on the British markets. And then with more soldiers living in the colonies, we're starting to see more conflicts between British soldiers and citizens of the colonies. So these, especially Bostonian colonists, we're going to see, our soldiers are really enjoy having a nice drink. So they'd be out on the streets, monitoring the streets during the day. Then they would go to the taverns at night and get into scuffles with the colonists. And it was just really kind of becoming a very toxic environment, these British soldiers living with the colonists, because the British soldiers have zero respect for the colonists. They think they're dumb crybabies that, don't know anything. Whereas, the colonists feel the same about the British soldiers. Whatever, you guys are just the drunks they pulled off the street in Britain and trained to be in the army and then sent over here. So, they definitely don't have a lot of respect towards each other. The British soldiers are going to be constantly harassed by the colonists. And then a lot of this is going to kind of lead this tension that we're seeing build as more colonists are shoved into these cities. More soldiers are shoved into these cities. Things are going to start happening that are more violent. One of those being the Boston Massacre, which is what you guys are going to be looking at today. So hope that kind of gives some background information of these new policies. Yes, we take away the stamp tax, but taxes are not gone now. The British government keeps kind of digging their own grave here.